Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third and final video in this intro series. In this, I'm going to give you some additional course information and also some tips for success in this class. And I want to start because as you start going through my textbook slides, you're going to notice that I've put a lot of information on them. This is not to overwhelm you. This is because they are acting as our textbook. And I want to be thorough rather than too light and leave you in the lurch without enough information to be successful in this class. So what can you do to help parse out my textbook slides so you can make sense and you can actually pay attention to what is most important, what is supporting information, and what are the things that are important for the slides, but you don't necessarily need to copy down or ever reproduce in my class. So as you go through my textbook slides, you'll notice that on all the slides, there'll be a lot of bold, italics, blue font. These are the most important concepts and the most important definitions in the class. These are the things that you should definitely write down in your notes. Whenever it comes to studying, make sure that you understand the concepts and the vocabulary related to the things that are in bold, italics, blue font. So this should draw your eye to the most important part, and then usually the rest of the slide is in support of what's in bold, italics, blue font. I also will be using green font, bold, italics, green font. And this is to indicate information that's extending concepts beyond the level that I'm going to ask you on quizzes or exams. So I usually think about this as for the curious. So if you're really curious or interested in this topic, here's some additional information about it. It's up to you on how much you want to pay attention to it. I think it is very supportive of all the stuff. So I always think that you should be paying attention to all of it. But think about this as whenever you read it, this is for the curious. This is for extending your knowledge past what is going to be necessary for just the quizzes and the exams. So this is really what gives a lot of life to the content we're going to get, but it's not necessarily going to be what I quiz and exam you on. And then there's the red font. And red font means that you do not need to copy this down. You do not need to commit it to memory. So I'm typically using red font for the more complicated equations where they're going to support what I'm talking about, but I do not expect you to actually know that equation, use that equation, or reproduce that equation whenever you're working on homeworks, quizzes, and exams. There are occasionally other things that I'll put in red font, which are very, very specific details, which are essentially, this is material that's going to be well beyond the 100 level course, but I have it there for me to reference and for you to actually be able to see. So the red font, you can think about this as the stuff that you don't need to commit to memory. And then I have a fourth color, purple text, I use sort of as a highlighter, something that can draw your attention somewhere, something that's going to emphasize, say, the bold blue italics font with supporting information. So I use my purple text mostly as a highlighter. It's indicating the parts of the slide that you should be paying attention to. So hopefully with these sort of four color system that I have put together, you can now start navigating the slides and they feel a little bit less overwhelming, and it'll really help you with taking notes. And on the topic of taking notes, I want to give you some tips for note-taking and studying. So some of my suggestions to you, and this applies to not only this class, but all classes that you'll be taking at university. So my tips for taking notes and studying. One, I highly suggest taking handwritten notes. I know it feels a little bit archaic, and we have these wonderful devices that we all have now that make it super easy and fast to type out what you're hearing. But one of the problems that we see, and there's a lot of studies that support this, is that whenever you just listen and you type out what you're hearing, you're just letting that information kind of flow through you, and you're just putting it down on page, and you're never committing it to memory. Where whenever you write, you have to pay attention to what you're writing and saying. You also usually have to shorten it, so you have to come up with your own sort of a language to encode and condense the information. So by handwriting notes, you're actually doing a lot of the learning process and a lot of the process that we use as humans to commit things to memory. So I highly suggest handwritten notes. I also suggest that about once a week or maybe every other week, or if you can do it at all. So maybe just for every quiz and for every exam, reorganize and recopy your notes. Studies show that this has a very massive benefit for learning. It helps you actually take the knowledge, you get to refresh it, you get to review it, and most importantly, you get to organize it in a way that works for your brain. So it's not always necessarily, in fact, it shouldn't be about just reproducing exactly what I have. Whenever you reorganize and recopy your notes, and eventually whenever you're first taking your notes, you should be imparting a bit of structure that matches your brain and your style of thinking. So I highly suggest reorganizing and recopying your notes. This will get you most of the way to studying. This is how I used to study for quizzes and exams as an undergrad and a graduate student. The first thing I would do is I would recopy and reorganize my notes. So try to do this on a weekly or every other weekly basis. At the bare minimum, I highly suggest, like before you take a quiz or before you take an exam, recopy and reorganize your notes and use that to produce a one or a couple of page study guide for yourself. And then that way, since my quizzes and exams are open note, you can have that reorganized and recopied version of your notes and perhaps condensed version of your notes at the ready. So whenever you're reorganizing, really the trick here is to try to add structure to the content and a structure that matches your brain. Try to do the connections, try to figure out what the big important topic is, and then the subtopics that come off of that. And as you play around with this, it is a skill that definitely needs work, but hopefully the more that you work on it, the better you'll get at it. And then I also suggest make lists of course vocabulary. Every subject, every academic discipline has their own slew of jargon, which feels like a foreign language until you commit it to memory. So the way I used to do this is I'd write down the vocabulary words and I'd write down the definitions. I'd do that a few times. And then what I'd do is I'd go through the list. I'd write down what the vocabulary word is. And then I would check to see whether I could write down a passable definition of it or not. And I'd go through my list of vocab words. And if I couldn't write down a passable definition or a passable description of the concept, then I would have a shorter list then that I would go recopy those, say 5 or 10 times. And then I'll do that again. And eventually it was a lot of work and a lot of effort sometimes, but eventually I would have committed the course vocabulary, the things that we use to communicate with one another in a specialized topic, to memory. And that is really, really important. If we're going to be having a communication and discussion about astronomy, you need to be up on the words that we use in astronomy. I also suggest that as you go through the notes, I have plenty of examples in the notes. So particularly with the math-based and conceptual questions, practice them. So go over the examples that I give over and over and over again, maybe change the numbers a little bit, practice them to the point where you have no problem working them, you feel comfortable with them, and you'll know that you have really started to get them if you can start thinking about interesting ways that you could change the question to ask about the concept in new ways. Also, if there are example questions in the textbook slides or study guide, be sure that you know them and know how to get the correct answer. If I have an example, especially in a study guide, then it's probably there for a reason. So whenever I have examples, make sure you get those. If you're having trouble with any of the material, because sometimes this can get a little bit technical, especially whenever we hit things like gravity and thermal radiation, then reach out to me, reach out to a TA. We are here to support and help you. So please make use of that. Make sure that you can handle all the examples. If you can do that, you should be very successful in this class. And then finally, whenever preparing for quizzes and exams, review your engagement exercises and your homework assignments. I have designed all of them, and I have designed the engagement exercises and homework assignments to lead up to the quizzes and the exams. I try to make it whenever you take a quiz and exam, sure, you'll be facing some new questions, but hopefully none of the questions are like, oh, wow, that's a really big surprise, because I'm trying to scaffold you, build you up towards the quiz and exam questions. The next thing I want to talk to you about is my 2-attempt policy. So my 2-attempt policy applies to all quizzes and all exams. And the idea behind this is, what are humans best at? Well, one of the things that we're best at is making mistakes and then learning from them. So one of the basic processes that humans learn by is learning from our mistakes. So I'm trying to make the room for you to make mistakes and then the opportunity to learn from them. That is the heart of this 2-attempt policy. So the way that actually plays out in the structure of this class is whenever you have a quiz or exam, you're going to have a first attempt at it on Monday. This is required, and treat it as if it was the only attempt. Because if you are happy with your score, you can skip the second attempt. So you'll take the first attempt, And then after you take the first attempt, I'll have a lot of information about how the class did. I'll review that information. I'll identify the most missed concepts. I'll identify the most missed questions. And then I will put together some feedback for you. And I'll release that, which you can read through whether or not you're going to take the second attempt or not. But if you're taking the second attempt, definitely read through it. And then you'll have all the way until Friday to go back to studying, because how do you know what you know until you try? The first attempt reveals that information to you. It reveals how well you studied, reveals what you knew and what you didn't know, and you probably weren't fully sure of what you didn't know until you tried. But then you'll have all week to go shore up your knowledge, go back to studying, and then on that Friday, you'll get an optional second attempt. So the way that the grading works with this 2-attempt policy, that first attempt is absolutely necessary. You have to take it. If you're happy with your score, so if it comes out to be like an A, or if you're happy with a B, or even if you're happy with a C, no matter what the score is, if you're happy with it, you do not have to take the second attempt. I will calculate your quiz or exam grade related to that quiz or exam using only your first attempt score. Now, if you take the first attempt, you're like, man, I'd really like to improve that score because that'll be a lot towards improving my grade in this class, then you can take the second attempt. And if you use both attempts, I will calculate your quiz or exam grade as the average of both attempts. So yes, there is a little bit of risk. You could score lower on the second attempt and therefore end up with a slightly lower quiz or exam grade. But even with that little bit of risk, you have massive advantages. One, you've seen what the quiz or exam is structured like, so you know what kind of questions I'm going to be asking. It won't be the exact same version that you took on the first attempt, but it'll draw from the same pools of questions. So you'll see a lot of familiar questions. Maybe things will just be mixed up a little bit. So you'll know what the quiz looks like. You'll also have been able to test and see what you knew and didn't know, and have had time to go back and shore up other things that you weren't super comfortable on, what you missed the first time around. Plus, you're going to have my feedback and all that time to studying. So the second attempt, you have a massive advantage if you actually do something about it. And the way that this is played out, I've been doing this for several years now. On the second attempt, the scores are usually half a letter grade to a letter grade higher than the first attempt. There are always a few cases where somebody took a small hit and their grade went down, and almost all of those cases, it can be traced back to they just took the second attempt with no additional effort, just hoping for a better grade. And then the random draw of questions got them a little bit. So be aware there is a little bit of risk. I have to do this because it is how the 2-attempt policy works. If I only took the highest of the 2 attempts, then everybody just used the first attempt to farm information so they could do better on the second attempt, which undermines the entire system. So yes, if you use both attempts, your quiz or exam grade will be the average of both attempts. So beware. My animations are a little messed up on that one, but if you need help with class, so if you want or need help, I cannot urge you enough to please reach out. I've worked on putting together a astronomy team. So we have 4 undergraduate astronomy TAs, undergraduate guides to your success in this class, and they and I are here to help you. I've been working with them to make sure that they're going to be ready and available to assist you. I, of course, will always be ready and available to assist you. You can reach out to us via email. So here is all of our contact information. You can schedule Zoom meetings or tutoring sessions with the TAs. You can schedule Zoom meetings with me. You can attend my open door hours if you are physically here on campus. But please reach out to us if you need help, and reach out early on. If we can intervene early on, then that'll pay dividends for the rest of the semester. We are here to help. We are going to be kind. We're going to be friendly as much as we can. And our goal is to make you successful in this class. I am a very ardent believer in a relationship-rich class environment, and this is one of the best ways to support that, is for me to actually listen to my students and to put together a team of people that will listen to your needs, and then we will act upon them to make sure you can be successful in this class. that's what I have for you. And that ends the introduction videos to this class. Hopefully you found them useful. If you have any remaining questions, please reach out to me and I'll be sure to clarify anything that you need. That way we can all hit the ground running for this semester and you will feel like you can be successful in this course. Thank you for your attention.